Thank you for joining us. Thank you for all you do for students. We really appreciate you taking time here at the end of your day to join us, and so we'll make that time worthwhile for you. You can see the first slide here is our landing page for the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis. And I would just like to point out that I will be talking about primarily the resources behind our teacher portal, which is highlighted in the blue to the right. But before I start on that, I want to mention that you can sort and filter hundreds of free lesson plans, PowerPoints, children's literature books that teach economic or personal finance concepts with the bar below by selecting and filtering out that way as well. Those resources include things that are not behind the teacher portal, and so you're only seeing a very small sample today of what we have available. If you go to the next slide for me, Gene. The next slide is actually how to log into our teacher portal. And the first time that you join or the first time that you log in, you'll be asked information about your school, things like that. You would click the register, let's get you started, register button, and then you'd be able to sign up for a free account with us. The box below that's highlighted is a new feature that I'll go over a little bit. The student has a separate login, and we'll talk about that later, but I just wanted to point out that those are two different logins. Next slide, please, Gene. So once you've logged in the first time, you would get a username and a username and password through email, and from here they will ask you to change it, and you'll get access to our teacher portal, and you see across the top of the slide My Classrooms, Resource Gallery, Professional Development, and Classroom Activities, and Fredcast. The professional development, depending on the state that you're in, you can get a 1 hour of professional development for every class of 15 who uses one of our online courses and completes the survey. It depends on the state, though, so you'll have to check that. But we do send those certificates to you. Next slide, please. On the next slide, you'll see how to add a class. And so I'm going to just talk you through the process of adding a class, adding students, adding resources, and then accessing the assessments. And while I do that, I'll show you a couple of resources as we go through. But we're just going to create a class here, and it's a step-by-step process. We just type the name in, the begin and end dates, and we create the class. If you'd go to the next slide for me, Gene. Once we've created this class and put our dates in there, then it's going to ask us to add students. And so you see the title of the slide, you can add students or have them add themselves with Google. We're very excited about this because, as you can imagine, with the Federal Reserve System, to have our systems work with Google was a really good accomplishment for us, and we're happy that we're able to offer that for teachers. So if you do have a Google Classroom or your students can access Gmail, then you can use that code. If not, you'll just use the traditional Econ Lowdown login listed below. If your students are 13 or older, we can keep the email address for you so that you can email syllabus information, things like that as well. Next slide, please, Gene. So on this next slide, you'll see adding resources, and so we would give the students the student code, which you can see there. They would be able to add themselves to your class through that, and then you would click the Resource Gallery, which is the second tab on the top, and that is where you'll access our resources. If you could go to the next slide for me, Gene. We'll go through a few of the resources here. I just wanted to show what it looks like when you first click the resource gallery. There are 355 resources behind it, including videos, podcasts, online modules, and reading Q&A. And I'm going to show you a couple of examples of each of those here in a moment. On the next slide, if you could go for me, Gene, you'll see that I filtered out middle school. And so there's high school and middle school options, well, elementary as well. You see there's 104 resources for middle school filtered out here as well. So these include, as I mentioned, the online courses, which comparative advantage you see there, and capital markets, those are courses. And then on the next slide, if you could go there, I've shown a couple of examples of a video Q&A and a reading Q&A. And so you can see how this is what it would look like if you were in your portal behind your account looking at your dashboard. You'd be able to access the standards, the time required. You can click View Additional Resources, and it's linked to other resources that fit into these content areas. Next slide for me, Gene. This one shows the online modules, and there are many online modules behind the portal. I honestly don't know. We've got so many now. This one I selected is a fiscal policy course, and you can see there were 597 classes enrolled in it. Lists the standards, the content, the standards in economics, as well as the Common Core standards, and then the topics across the top. And you can preview any of these from the teacher view. And if you want to add it to your classroom, you would just click Select. Next slide for me, Gene. Any of our materials you can use. You can change the begin and end date of any of those. Really easy to do. Next slide, please. On this slide, I'm showing you the reading Q&A, which is a page 1 economics and focus on finance. And these are monthly. Every other month one is economics, and then one is personal finance. For middle school teachers, the personal finance articles come with a middle school version, which is a lower reading level, but the content is the same. And so we've got that. The article is not indicated as middle school for the student. They don't know that it's a middle school or high school. Only you would be able to see that. On the next slide, you'll see what those reading Q&As look like from a student perspective. So if the student logs in, they're able to read the article, and these screenshots are from the latest one, Cars and Cash, and so they would read the article and then answer questions on the screen, and when they're done, they can hit submit, and then you would receive the grade. I'll go over that in a few minutes here. But any of these resources that you would select, you would just add them to your syllabus, which that'll be on the next slide. And when you're looking at your syllabus, you add materials, take them away, make any changes. You have these options you see across the top of email, preview, and so forth, download. Nothing is changed until you hit publish. And then once you hit publish, it's in real time, so students could access any materials that you want them to right away. On the next slide, you'll see what the syllabus looks like as a PDF or as the student view. So you could email this. It's available electronically or as a PDF. If you send it to the students, the option to launch the syllabus or launch any of the materials in the syllabus is there for the students. Next slide, please, Gene. Here you'll see this is a more of a close-up of the video. So a student, if you wanted to preview a video, you could do so. You see the number of classes that have watched it, the grade level, middle through high school, and then the time, 5 minutes. And then the next slide, I'm going to show you what the video would look like to the student. So the student logs in. the video starts, and this one, you see the status bar along the bottom, 2.5 minute video. When they're done, they have the option to watch the video or take the quiz. If you could go to the next slide for me, Gene. You'll see here questions for the students, and they've, generally this video has 5 questions. We base it kind of on the length of the video and the content covered, but the student would answer those questions, and then when they're done, they would get their score. And you see at the bottom, you scored 80%, so that student in the videos could watch the video or retake the quiz. Next slide for me, Gene. Once you've assigned some materials to your students and they've done the video, like in this case, these are videos, you can log in as a teacher and you would see a screen like this under student progress, the number of times the students watched the video, the number of times they took the quiz, and the quiz score. And I always jokingly say, we've all taught this kid who didn't watch the video, took the quiz twice, and got a 42%. I always say we all have taught that student. But this is a nice way for accountability that you can know whether or not your students have watched the video. Next slide, please, Gene. And on this slide, you'll see the reading Q&A. And so that article I showed you before, the one about buying a car, Cars and Cash, so the student, it shows graded, they got a 10 out of 10 and, 100% there. So you would be able to access that. Some of the reading Q&As allow you to do short answer questions as well. And then you can go in and manually grade those. On the next slide, you're going to see what one of the online module assessments looks like. And so if you assign a student one of our online modules, that's more of a summative assessment. So the students take a pre-test, they work through the course, and then they take a post-test. You'll notice there the blue arrow has a reset button. So if a student has an IEP, 504 plan, something like that, we've set it up so that you can reset it for them one time, and so they can retake the course. If you have a student requiring additional retakes, then you have to log them in as a new student and give them 2 more chances that way. But it's a nice feature for you to have some flexibility. Next slide, please, Gene. Here you'll see we're able to, or you were able to print certificates of completion for any of the resources we have, and I'm not sure if you can see it on the screen, but it's a watermarked certificate that you could print on cardstock and sign for them that they've completed the course or video, whatever you'd like. So kind of nice just to not do a percentage score on everything, so this is a nice way to do it. Next slide, please. In my last couple of minutes here, I'll just share a couple of items from other reserve banks and the Board of Governors. These are all behind our teacher portal, but there's resources from other Fed districts and the board, as I mentioned. So you see the Classroom Economist on the left is an Atlanta series of videos, excellent videos on the Fed. You can access all of those from behind the St. Louis Teacher Portal. The Banknote Bonanza is a U.S. currency exhibit publication or videos from the Board of Governors, and then the Fed FAQ. Those are really short videos as well from the Board of Governors, all accessible from behind our teacher portal. Next slide, please, Gene. On this slide, again, are just some other resources from the various banks I mentioned. The Federal Reserve and You is from Philadelphia. We have some of the chapters behind that, and later on, one of my colleagues is going to speak more about that, but we have a couple of those behind our portal. The Fed Explained is another series that goes through different aspects of the Federal Reserve Bank. and Fed system. And then Fed Functions is a Board of Governors resource. Again, really short videos that just teach various content, various topics centered on the Fed and the Fed system.